Hey guys, Rabbi Zev Bannett. We're going to be discussing a difficult topic in this video, the topic of the Torah's view and the map of the Torah of transgenderism. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps us put this Torah out there in a much more powerful way. There's two main points I want to talk about here, and the goal, just to stress this, is that the Torah map, the Torah view is that we don't want to be part of this dynamic of chesed and gvura, which really means the dynamic of chesed is about being more free, gvura is about being more restrained, chesed is about there being the breaking of borders and boundaries, gvura is about there being more borders and boundaries, more limits, more labels, more categories, and we need each of those things, and when we're able to know when to take one and when to take the other, that's when we achieve what's called tiferet, and these are Kabbalah concepts, but they're very, very profoundly real. We live them. We're constantly trying to either break free of certain boundaries or to impose new boundaries when we feel like there's too much freedom, too much room, and there's not enough order, not enough structure. So we're constantly moving between those two things, and the Torah goal is to move through those things intentionally, not to be too stuck in one or the other, and not to constantly be fighting against boundaries, even when it's not the right thing to do, not to constantly be adding boundaries when it's not the right thing to do, but to know exactly when we need each of those to create greater connection, greater consciousness, greater neshama presence in the world. That's what we're going to try to achieve with this video. That's the concept of Tiferet. So let's go now to the two main points I want to discuss in this video about the issue of transgenderism in the world today. The point number one is to understand the idea of Zachar and Nekeva in the Torah map of things. Zachar and Nekeva in the secular and the cultural world today is the idea of male and female. We tend to think of it with all kinds of associations. There's these discussions, gender versus biology, the body, the identity, the construct, gender fluidity, all these ideas are being thrown around. Well, the Torah map is very, very simple, and it's because it really gets to the key and the core of these things. So there's the concept of Zachar and the concept of Nekeva, and these are not intrinsically models about reproduction. In fact, the physiological reproduction is actually a manifestation of them. It's an expression or a reflection of them, but it's secondary, and I'll show what I mean by that. So the idea of Zachar is the concept of the initial flash of something. So it's from the language of zikaron, like a memory. So what a memory is in our mind is it's something that will suddenly appear in your mind, a memory that you access, and when it appears in your mind, suddenly you have this memory present, and then it leads to a cascade of thoughts and ideas that are essentially built out according to your natural habits of thought that you've developed in your own self, which we're going to talk about a little further in point number two. So the idea of there being this cascade of thoughts, and the idea of there, as a result of this initial flash, Zachar is the initial flash, and then the Nekeva, the idea of the cascade that comes as a result of that, is the idea of Nekeva. Now, why is that the meaning of those things? Well, Nekeva means like an opening, like a space. And you can think of your mind as a context in which when you put a trigger in there, like a memory, then that context will then develop a series of thoughts and ideas, some of which can be completely new, and they will proliferate in your mind according to the patterns of your mind. So it's also true in terms of the idea of reproductivity. Think about it like this for a second. When I share an idea with you right now, I'm acting as the Zachar. I'm putting an idea out into the world, and then you receive it, and then you build it out in your mind. And that's actually how creativity works, in that when there's an idea that's shared, so I'm playing the role of the Zachar, you now receive it, you now build it out, and now you're operating as the Nekeva. Nothing to do with your reproductive organs, but you'll notice that that's very similar to the physiological reproductive dynamic that we have with our bodies. In other words, if I have male reproductive organs, then they work the same way. There's this initial flash, the breaking in of the male organ in the situation of reproduction, essentially is the initial flash, and then the female body basically creates this cascade after the body selects exactly which thing it's going to be, the egg and the sperm and whatever, and then the dynamic is that now there's this development, a cascade of processes where the female body builds that out into the new entity, the new creation. So when I share an idea with you and you receive it, you're able to now take the idea into your own mind and recast it and understand it for yourself in whatever form you want, and kind of put out into the world now your new idea that comes from that. And so that's the idea of Zachar and Nekeva in the Torah. It's not inherently about reproduction, although the physiology of our bodies is a reflection of that general theme. That's why when we talk about Hashem in the Torah as being called male, we call Hashem Hu, which means him. So that's because Hashem is generally the one who is putting things into the world, and where we are the female, we are the ones receiving that and then building it out. Our whole role here is to build out things that we receive from Hashem. That's all point one, understanding what Zachar and Nekeva mean in the Torah's view, and to sort of strip away all the cultural associations and understand what is the definition of Zachar, what is the definition of Nekeva. That is a conceptual dynamic, and it is also reflected physiologically in the ultimate act of creativity, which is the creation of a new person in the world through the fusion of two people in that context. So now let's go to point number two. Point number two relates to the the internal world of our own structure. And the Torah has a map of how you are structured. There's the top and the bottom of the map essentially is, at the very top there is you, the self, the neshama, and that actually is never changing. It's immutable. It's always the same you looking out through your eyes. You're always the same self. But the things in between the self and the body at the bottom, the body being the most physical, the most solidified, the most structured expression of yourself in the world, but in between that there's a whole array of increasingly tangible but still somewhat intangible attributes and areas. That's the world of perception, the world of thought, and the world of emotion. And those things are actually much more intangible than the body, but they're much more dynamic and changing than the self. And so within that space, the Torah maps out there's this dynamic of flux, of fluctuation, and that's what we can even use this word, the word fluidity. There is a lot of movement and change and dynamics and dynamism in those inner areas, the inner space of the self. And the Torah has a map of this. It's a very detailed map, and you can actually learn a lot more about this map at yesodblocks.com. That's the website that's the parent of this YouTube channel, which I hope you've subscribed by now to the YouTube channel as well. You can head over there to subscribe there and get a lot more information about these kinds of things as well. But the point is that the Torah's map of these things is very detailed, very extensive, and one of the key details of this map is that there is this tendency or this capacity, this power that we have to actually construct our own sense of self in this space of the world of perception, the world of thought, and the world of emotion. What that means is there was this tree called the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, which gave us the power to actually construct our own ideas about who we were, our own perceptions of ourselves based on our own emotional accumulations, the emotional experiences you had when you were little, when you're big, whatever your situation is, and they lead to all kinds of thoughts as well. And then you actually develop perceptions of yourself. We can even call those things your self-image. And you can develop that according to a whole array of different inputs that you happen to have in your life. And so that power, the power to develop perceptions of who you are and what you are, is a function of your own choice, is a function of your own habits, is a function of your own mind and emotional space. So all of that is something which is constantly in flux. In other words, you could actually see yourself today in a certain way and then see yourself in a completely different way in 10 years from now. And the irony is that the self is always the same you. The you that's watching the movie of your life is always still the same you. But inside of the space of perceptions and thoughts and emotions, there's tremendous fluidity, tremendous flux. And so the Torah stance on today's idea of transgenderism, the idea that, well, I have a certain identity. I feel like I'm gender fluid. I feel like I'm a woman even though I have male reproductive organs. I feel like I'm a man even though I have female reproductive organs. The Torah looks at all that and says, this conversation doesn't really flow according to the reality of the Torah's map. Why doesn't it flow? Because the reproductive organs that you have nothing to do with the particular dynamism of the inner space of yourself. In other words, you can operate as a female right now. Right now, you actually are operating as a female. If you're watching this video, then you're operating as a nekeva because I'm sharing and you're receiving. So in terms of the inner space of yourself, right now you are being a nekeva. But that doesn't mean that now your reproductive organs are the kind that contribute to reproduction by receiving and then building out the child's body. If you have male reproductive organs, even if you operate as a nekeva right now in this setting, it doesn't mean that your reproductive organs are now also nekeva reproductive organs, because the body doesn't change that way. And so you have two different areas. There's the body in terms of its capacity, specifically operating as zachar nekeva dynamics for reproduction, the process of actually profoundly fusing with somebody else physiologically to create a new person in the world. And then we also have the internal dynamic space of the world of perception, thought, and emotion, within which we develop a whole set of ideas as to who we are, and we use it to anchor ourselves in the world to sort of figure out, okay, I want to figure out how to respond to this person. How do I act in this situation? How do I behave? What do I do? So we build these thought structures, these perceptions, these pairs of glasses to view ourselves so we can then try to effectively navigate the world. And the Torah says, okay, so first of all, you should try to constantly develop pairs of glasses that are accurate. And we all know we can develop perceptions of ourselves that are inaccurate. We can see ourselves in false ways. We can be completely distorted and biased by our own feelings. If you get hurt badly enough as you grow up, if you feel like you don't fit in, if you feel like other people don't love you as what you are, so then that can create tremendous pressure to develop perceptions of ourselves that are not true. For example, perceiving yourself as not special because of the way that you're treated. So the Torah's map is that you're actually endlessly irreplaceable. On the level of neshama, there is no other you. There never will be. So the idea that because people make us feel horrible about ourselves when we're experiencing emotional pain from other people's reactions to us, and then we start to see ourselves, to develop a lens that we are actually unworthy, or that we don't fit in, or that we're not, the way that we are is not good enough. So then that can really seriously develop perceptions that are false of ourselves. So we all know that we can do that. And what the Torah says about this idea of transgenderism is, okay, so you have your particular struggle emotionally. You're having whatever your life makeup is on the inner space of yourself. So yeah, there's a lot to do there. There's a lot of work to try to clarify what's real, what's not, what's true, what's not. Why do I feel the way I feel? All of those types of things. And then in separation from that, there is also a particular set of tools that we use at some point in our lives, hopefully, to do something very specific and profound. And that's where we act to actually contribute by sharing ourselves in a certain way with somebody else that will then lead to the fusion of two selves to create a new person in the world. And that is the area of reproduction. And that also has a Zachar Nekeva signature where one person has one type of thing and the other person has a different type. And the Zachar has the beginning phase, the contribution, the Nekeva receives that in a certain form, then builds it out. And that is how it always has been, always will be. And it is separate from the inner dynamism that we have within our emotional and thought-based and perceptual framework. And there is no real way to avoid that. And so what happens in today's transgender discussions is that there is this extending of the dynamism of the inner space with all of its complexity as a function of the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, extending that to the world of reproduction, and then actually saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to externally, superficially change my body in a way that I feel is now going to be more reflective of the general inner dynamism. But those things don't actually have to be linked. In fact, they're not linked at all, because you can be, like I said, very, very nekeva in a situation, receiving, and then still have male zachar reproductive organs that you're now going to use to do this profound activity of bringing a child. So the bottom line of all this is these things are not connected necessarily. In other words, not the way that it's usually described, that we're going to take the world of feelings and now say, I'm going to now change my body in this specific way. Engaging in these kinds of surgeries or hormonal treatments, so the issue is that on the inner side, on the emotional side, on the thought-based side, on the perceptual side, what you're doing is you end up taking what's going on right now, the feelings that you're having, that you're struggling with, whatever your compiled identity is right now, the set of perceptions you're using to view yourself, which again will change. They always do change over time. So what you're doing is you're basically saying, I'm going to focus on this thing now that I'm experiencing, and the rest of me, future me, that might want to actually one day reproduce with somebody, to actually engage in this profound activity, can't do that anymore because of what I'm experiencing now. I'm blocking that out. And that is the Torah approach, is to say, okay, whatever your inner space issues are, let's clarify them, let's work through them, let's understand them, but don't conflate that with today's ideas about gender and gender ideologies, where there's guys, there's girls, and then there's this idea there's something in between. Reproductively, there's only two things that you can do. Those are the two modes you could be in. And then internally, so there's a whole array of complexity that you want to clarify. But to mix those things together can lead to very, very difficult decisions and very big regrets as you suddenly discover future you is not taken care of by past you. And then you actually have a whole new array of pain and self-destructive feelings and perspectives as you say to yourself, wow, I lost the ability to do this thing that I didn't know that I would want it when I was 15 or 14 or 18. I didn't know yet what it would even mean to be able to contribute with another person to create a child that's an extension of my own self through the process of doing this, where we actually combine our two selves to make someone new. I mean, that's an incredible phenomenon, and we might not always appreciate it when we are 15 years old. So to not take care of future you and to undermine that and undercut that in ways that have permanent consequences on the body that is not even related to the inner dynamism of the Zachar Nekeva dynamics that we're describing here is something which can very often be very destructive. So that's basically the Torah map of how to see these things, the different areas, the structure, Kabbalistically and conceptually, and then basically the idea is to clarify all that to understand what to do going forward with these kinds of feelings. If you're struggling with these things, you can always reach out also, just so you know, you can go to yesodblocks.com. I have a WhatsApp link on the website. You're welcome to reach out with any questions about this, things that you're struggling with, or friends that you know that are struggling with these things. Please reach out, because some of these decisions are not reversible, and it's something which is very important to understand, at least the totality of what's being done and how it works and how it functions within us and what the consequences can be of making these decisions. They're all very, very significant, and so that all needs to be understood very carefully. So hope that was useful. Again, please subscribe to the channel, and you can head over to yesodblocks.com. You can subscribe there and support what we're doing by joining and also getting access to all the content that we have there. Thanks so much for watching, and looking forward to having you join me for the next video.